According to Professor Cronon, he says, quote, Garvey, he's talking about Garvey in London, Garvey also became interested in the position of Negroes in the United States, and it was in London that he came across a copy of Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. This book had a profound effect upon him, as he later testified. Quote, this is Garvey, according to Professor Cronon. I read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may so call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me. I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs? I could not find them, and then I declared, I will help to make them. You all know that famous quotation, right? Yeah. You think you know it. Yeah. And then Professor Cronon concludes, the seeds of Garveyism had unwittingly been sown by the great compromiser and advocate of accommodation, the venerable sage of Tuskegee. And Professor Cronon cites down here Garvey's essay and autobiography, The Negro's Greatest Enemy, Current History Magazine, and Marcus Garvey's Philosophy and Opinions, Volume 2, page 124. Now, there is no more extreme opponent and critic of Professor Cronon than our brother Tony Martin. I think everyone would agree with that. Tony Martin slams Professor Cronon's Black Moses at every turn. But ironically, Professor Tony Martin accepts Professor Cronon's rendering of Garvey's statement. This statement could not be in more historical error, and yet Tony Martin accepts it. Tony Martin says, down here, it was not long after this conference, reported in the London-based African Times and Orient Review, for which Garvey worked, that Garvey read Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. This had a profound effect on him, and it is from this event that, as he put it, his, quote, doom of being a race leader dawned on him. Here is a third. Every single Garvey scholar who writes about this question repeats the error. Here is just a third example. I could have chosen myriad more examples. Daniel Davis, in his biography of Marcus Garvey, published in 1972. One night, his windows shut against London's chill winds, Garvey began reading a book by an American that was to change his life. It was Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. And in its pages, Garvey found the beginning of the answer to his questions. And he goes through the same rigmarole of Garvey reading Booker T. Washington, and then I asked, where is the black man's government, etc. Would you know that Garvey never said any such thing? Well, let us look at what Garvey, that's the great accommodator, let's look at what Garvey actually did write. The source from which is taken the quotation about Booker T. Washington. It's an essay and autobiography called The Negro's Greatest Enemy. It was written while Garvey was incarcerated in the Tombs, which is the New York prison in Lower Manhattan. Garvey had been convicted of mail fraud in June of 1923, and he was denied bail, and they put him in the Tombs. While in the Tombs, Garvey wrote an essay giving the story of his life. Garvey excerpted, or rather reprinted in his own Negro World newspaper, a verbatim, complete text of the essay, The Negro's Greatest Enemy. Now let us look at what Garvey actually wrote. Quote, I became dissatisfied on that account. I went traveling to South and Central America and parts of the West Indies to find out if it was so elsewhere, and I found the same situation. I set sail for Europe to find out if it was different there. And again I found the same stumbling block. Quote, you're black. I read of the conditions in America. I read Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may so call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I had traveled through almost half of Europe. The grammar and the construction of the sentence does not say that he took his inspiration from Washington. The structure and the grammar of the sentence says, and then my doom of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I returned after I traveled through almost half of Europe. This is January of 1914, as the European nations are about to enter upon a most extraordinary slaughter called the Great War of 1914. And every day in Europe you could see the soldiers and the military formations marching up and down and practicing. That's what Garvey saw while traveling on the continent, and that's what he asked. Moreover, I dare anybody to read Up From Slavery and come away with the questions that Garvey posed. Where is the black man's government? Where is his army? Where is his country? Those are not questions that one takes from a reading of Booker T. Washington. And yet, two individuals as extreme in their opposition to each other as Edmund David Cronon and Tony Martin can make the same mistake and arrive at the same erroneous conclusion. In other words, when you see people of such divergent positions saying the same thing, you have to ask, is this simply sloppy reading? Yes, it is sloppy reading, but something more is happening. They want to believe it. Both of them want to believe it. And so they see words on the page, or in this case, they eliminate words that are on the page after I had traveled through almost half of Europe. So, my doom, if I may so call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I had traveled through almost half of Europe. And now it makes sense. I asked myself, where's the black man's government? Where's his king and his kingdom? Where is his... Now those questions make sense, because those questions cannot be derived from a reading of Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. The consequence, friends, of this error of historic proportions, is that it has aligned Garvey with a book that did not carry the weight or the influence that is attributed to it. But I, who come along now, given the weight of the existing interpretive apparatus, I now have to push against it. It's not hard, because you just put the words out there. But still, how much of the story of Garvey has been misdirected by going down that path? Okay? Now, This is a photograph of Garvey leaving the federal courthouse in Manhattan. He's just been convicted, and they're leading him out handcuffed and taking him to the Tombs prison. Neither Tony Martin nor Professor Cronon nor any of the other Garvey scholars who write about this subject pause and ask themselves, could it be that Garvey mentions Booker T. Washington in September of 1923 while he's appealing for bail and trying to get out of the slum? Could it be that Marcus Garvey is positioning himself with a subtle kind of ambivalence with Washington's name? Because Garvey is at this very moment embarked upon a Southern strategy of winning support from Southern whites. What better card to play than Booker T. Washington? In other words, both Professor Martin and Professor Cronon fell hook, line, and sinker for Garvey's ploy. But that's not what historians are supposed to do. Historians are supposed to investigate and disaggregate these matters and then weigh and evaluate the context of what might be inherent in that situation. We need to just take a few preliminary moments to examine two letters that Garvey wrote, one from Jamaica as he was leaving in 1912 to go to London, the second letter while he's in London and he sends back to Jamaica, and they're published, both of them, in Jamaica Times. On the front page of the Jamaica Times, how many people here remember the Jamaica Times? See, not many. A very important Jamaican newspaper. And this Jamaica Times was edited by Tom Redcombe, Thomas McDermott. I don't know whether Garvey did it or McDermott did it, but Garvey's name is concealed. And they published both letters under the pseudonym Umbilla, U-M-B-I-L-L-A. The first one is entitled Looking into the Future. And Garvey begins, "Sir, through the effort of William Wilberforce, the perseverance and paternal guidance of the British government, the colored and black man in the British West Indies emerged from that condition in which the ancients always placed the conquered, slavery, to that of a self-dependent and enterprising people. The effort is displayed in every direction, intellectual, physical, and moral. The former is in an assured and permanent state, the latter in a very transitory manner." Garvey is saying, I have my start in the condition of the conquered, slavery. In the present existence in the West Indies and the countries bordering the Caribbean Sea, fate has, I think, favored the idea of the right to a future colored nation, sister of the British Empire. The effort of the black man is to be seen in monuments and records from the days of the Spanish dominion until today. The hills, the glades, and the sea have been the recipient for 3 centuries of his labors. At present, the avenues of enterprise in the West Indies, his present home, and also in Central and South America, the field of his labor, his former opportunities are diminishing, although he has toiled and died for it. But as the thick cloud mist rolls by, propelled by the rising sun, we see that day is near. Garvey is saying the opportunities for black men are drying up in the West Indies.